Hey everybody, I'm Zach Heyde, and today I'm really excited to be chatting with Tristan Noon, who is a very talented composer, orchestrator, and music copyist based out of the UK. How's it going, Tristan?
Hey Zach, thanks for the chat. It's nice to actually properly chat face to face because obviously it's normally just me watching your YouTube videos, and it's just the first time we've actually chatted. So
it is really great, and you are one of a handful of people that I've connected with and stayed in touch with on Instagram, which is so funny that you can do that these days. It's like you, and I know a guy named J. Scott Rakosi that I'm going to chat with soon.
Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah, okay, cool. I didn't know if you knew him or not, but it's just, it's so interesting how people get connected. So it is awesome to chat face to face.
Yeah, it's so weird these days. I sort of wonder how people did it before social media. I mean, would you have had to just like send a letter and hope for the best? You have to keep exchanging letters, and it's so easy these days to sort of meet new people and just see what other people are doing, and then instantly become more insecure because you can see how good other people are.
It's true, and I'm trying to remember now. I can't remember. I think you might have followed me first. I couldn't remember. You were someone, I think that what happened was you followed me, and I saw that you were high. I considered you high profile, and I was like, wow, this guy followed me. And then I wondered if it was like, if you were one of those like bot accounts that just, like follows. And so I was like, and then I think you liked an additional post, and I was like, oh, this is a real person. So I followed your stuff, and you've done such an amazing amount of different things. I would love to hear more about like your backstory and how you got started, like what got you into music.
Okay, so first of all, I am actually a bot. This is a hologram. I'm not.
Okay, I was suspicious.
So yeah, my backstory. I don't know how it sort of compares to other people, but I've always had a sort of an interest in. I remember when I used to be in like infant school, and I used to like try and purposely sit as close to the piano as possible, just because I liked the way it sounded when it got played. And I never really did anything about it. I wanted to get lessons, but I never really felt confident enough to do it until I was in secondary school. So when I was in year 7, I started. I don't know what that is in USA terms. Is that your high school?
Middle
yeah,
school,
your high
maybe.
School.
Yeah, high school.
High school, yeah. So when I was in year 7, I started piano lessons, and I just really enjoyed it. I just really, I don't know, resonated with me, and I just became obsessed with it. So basically, I wasn't really sure whether I was going to, go into music at that point. I thought I was probably going to be into sport, so I was very into sport, and still am in some ways, just when I can find time. But music just sort of became my life really, and it was only a sort of time went by, and I began sort of contacting more and more people that I realised maybe this could be something more serious. But I wasn't sure what, because I was just literally playing piano. I wasn't really writing music. And then a few years later, I think it was probably year 9, I began writing my own music, which was quite bad looking back at it. But you start writing, and it wasn't really orchestral stuff necessarily. It was more pop and rock stuff. And I don't know, the more I sort of did it, the more I realized that I really enjoyed doing it, and so I sort of tried to navigate my way down that particular path. And then when it got to the end of school, I then went on to I'll say sixth form, even though it wasn't a sixth form, because if I call it college, then it's like your university.
Right.
So
right.
I'll say it's like the bit before university. So I went to sixth form and studied music and music tech, and then that's when I really thought, right, yeah, this could be an actual career now, because I sort of began to set out some sort of plan, as much as you can do in this industry, that I'm going to sort of write to as many people as possible. I'm going to try and get as much experience as I can. And I remember watching a particular behind the scenes recording of one of the Harry Potters. And It's on YouTube. You can find it. It's like Harry Potter 6 or something, and it's just behind the scenes at Abbey Road Studios. And I would sort of be quite cheeky and see what names came up. And one of the names was Alistair King, who's like a brilliant orchestrator, predominantly here in the UK, but he has worked sort of. I'm pretty sure he's worked with the Hollywood guys like Harry Gregson Williams, Ricky Gregson Williams. So I reached out to him. I think I found him on Facebook. And time went by and I didn't hear anything. But then I randomly heard something from him and we sort of struck up a rapport. Well, I was probably I was probably just annoying him by messaging him. But he actually was very kind and he said, do you fancy, if you want to come along to a session, just let me know. And so I was like, wow, yeah, I'd love to come along to a session. And my first ever recording session I went to was one of John Lunn's who did all the music for Downton Abbey and all the other ITV stuff that he does. So it was a Lady Vanishes session at Air Studios in London. So I went there and then I really enjoyed that and I had a million questions to ask about how it all worked because I had no idea previously to that. And then I went to various Downton Abbey recording sessions and I was just like a fly on the wall. I didn't know how anything worked. There was no pressure on me. I wasn't like doing a job. I was literally just going and watching.
Right.
So that was just eye-opening. And I really truly believe that anyone who wants to do this sort of job, like maybe as an orchestrator or like a composer for TV, it's just the best way, in my opinion, to get the experience because at that stage you're just absorbing everything that happens, even down to like, when do they take their lunch break? So when you go in and the pressure's on you, you're not like completely terrified about how things work or how long the session time is or just how things function, what people's job roles are, stuff like that. You know how to communicate with the conductor or something like that. It's just invaluable, that sort of stuff. And that is where I then met a guy called Simon Whiteside, who was brilliant to me because he sort of took me under his wing. I sort of cheekily asked if he needed any help with anything, then I'd be available. And a few months later, he said, I'm looking for an assistant. Are you up for it? So I said, yeah, that'd be amazing. And then it just all went from there. And I was, getting paid and learning on the job at the same time, which is obviously great. But eventually I started getting my own work through just being around in the studios and just being around that sort of world and getting the experience. And after all that happens, it's just a case of trying to find your own feet in the industry. And it just went from there, really. But that was my my sort of beginnings. But I'm always quite sort of nervous about telling people that because some people have started when they're like 4 years old, and I really only started when I was like 13.
I was 7, so. But I don't think that's uncommon, what you're describing. I don't think it's completely uncommon. I mean, a good friend of mine is equally as successful or unsuccessful as me, depending on the context. And he started when he was 14 as well. So I think it seems to be. Do you think that there's a difference between the two, like that somebody has a leg up if they start that young?
I don't think it means you have a leg up, but I do think it gives you an awful lot of power, like knowledge, because when you're young, you pick things up so much easier than, I guess, you're 13 or 14. You're still fairly young, but I don't know. It just felt like I was ancient when I started, and a lot of the people I was in my music class with, they'd been playing for a number of years before me. And especially with writing, because I'm not really like with writing. I have no I don't have any qualifications or anything like that. So it's not like I've gone through some sort of conservatoire or crazy musical training. I do think one of the best ways is to just do it, and it's always just the way of I think no matter whether you go to Berkeley or here in the UK like NFTS or somewhere like that, Obviously those places are an enormously beneficial place to a lot of people, but I do think for this specific industry and all the things that are involved, just to be in that world and whether you're an assistant or whatever it is that you're doing, just to get experience and do lots of that is so vital.
I'm surprised to hear too, like that you feel self-taught, because I'd always had the impression that orchestration and copyist work is something that required like formal education. Is that something you got at all in university, or did you get that exclusively like from your mentors?
Well, when I was at sixth form, I obviously had my A levels, so that's a pretty solid musical sort of grounding there with that course. But in terms of like a university degree, I went to Surrey for a short period of time, and then I didn't feel like the course was really suiting me. There was a lot of essay writing, and I knew I didn't really want to be doing that. It's like, if you can write a great essay, can you write a great score?
Right.
I don't think the two go hand in hand.
Slightly different. Yeah.
I don't understand it, to be honest. But shortly after, I got the assistant job, so it was all okay. But I think there's absolutely no harm in going to university. It won't make things worse. But I think where people get stuck is that they think just doing a degree will get them like a film scoring job or an orchestration job, which, as you probably know yourself, it's just not true. You have to go out there and really make connections with people and try and work with them and just get as much experience as possible. It's not good enough just to get a degree on its own. It's one part of a small piece of the puzzle. But in terms of orchestration, I learned a lot from Simon, and the more sessions I went to, I used to like collect the scores. So I've got like various Downton Abbey scores here and various Grantchesters and stuff like that, and I would just look through it, and people would sort of send me film scores and stuff like that, and you just sort of see what it is that works and how it all fits together. And then of course you're doing loads of session time and you pick up what works and what doesn't. But I've always had an interest in sort of orchestral writing ever since I started in music, really. So
I am curious to know a bit like about your how you learn on your own, because like as you're pointing out, like it really requires, like this industry requires people to be so proactive about their own education and growth. And like you said, expecting just a degree or a course or something to just give it to you, I think is that's only a small part of the puzzle. So with regards to like orchestration, because I always get really curious how people do this. You say you have like a bunch of scores and you use them to study. I've always found it really challenging to do that on a job, because like my research brain and my I need to work and get this done by tonight brain, I find it difficult to balance. So how do you feel like you best internalize new knowledge from scores or orchestration when you study them?
I sort of write it down, because I've got an awful memory. So if I learn something, I'll probably write it down rather than just try and memorize it. And I'll highlight stuff, like if I'm reading a book, or I'll print stuff out from the internet and highlight it, and that'll help me get into my brain. But I think with this stuff, it's mostly just being sort of motivated to do it, because you can have all the scores in the world, but if you don't have a passion for it, if you're not really interested in learning about it, then how are you going to do it? And I also think orchestration is very different to how a lot of people may perceive it, because of course we're working with MIDI data these days. It's not like we're taking an 8-line sketch from a composer, a handwritten sketch. We're working with MIDI. The composer has chosen what they want. To a varying degree, they put this mock-up together, and that is sort of what they want. And then maybe it's up to us to sort of split out strings and brass and winds and stuff if it's like an ensemble chord, or choosing maybe a different instrument. Maybe, you know, the classic one, I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday, the classic sort of composerism that sort of seems to come up quite a lot is just unnecessarily high cello writing when it doesn't need to be there, or
Guilty.
you know. So it's like, you know, it's all about sort of making suggestions and saying, look, this isn't going to balance well when we record it. Obviously it works in the mock-up, but in a real life situation, that how you've got it now, it's like you've got the violins way too low, then you've got like the viola's way too high and the cello way too high, and you're trying to put the violins and the melody, and it's like, is this what you actually want? And it's sort of pointing out these things, because, you know, as you know, when you're writing, it's super hard to see, like with the piano roll, what really is going on in terms of where the voices are sitting, and sometimes just filling out the chord as well and getting the right voicings is something that I'll try and help the composer with. Making suggestions here and there, but trying to find a balance where you're doing enough to make it sound hopefully better than it was in the mock-up, but also not going too far by, you know, completely changing what they've done, in which case you'll probably be fired. So, you know, there is such a fine balance. Where I've sort of deviated off your original question.
No, it's all relevant. It's all relevant. And actually, you know, that brings me up to a very specific follow-up question, because you just mentioned the piano roll, and I find that really interesting because I remember, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, I first saw one of John Powell's piano roll playthroughs, which I think are so cool. And I've been using Logic for many years, but when I saw the playthrough, that was like the first time where it struck me that the piano roll can be a really great tool for what you just mentioned, which is checking like voicings. Is that something you use actively, like when you're doing orchestration or even composing, to kind of cross-reference what you've written?
I mean, I don't use the piano roll for that when I'm orchestrating. But I do when I'm composing, and I sort of use the note labels. You can do this thing in Logic where you can, it's like view note labels, and you can actually have the note name on, which is super.
I'm writing that down.
Which is super.
I knew I was going to learn something.
Because it's, you know, because you can actually see what note it's playing at the time. And
right.
Although that sort of sounds obvious, if you're just looking at blocks that are, you know, spaced however far apart, that it's sort of hard to see where you're filling out the voices. But if you can actually see the notes, and you can say, oh, look, I've got an A and a C and F. Oh, look, you know, that's an A major, F major chord. But, you know, if you didn't have that one, then, you know, you might not necessarily see at first glance what's happening. So I think the piano roll is, like you say, it's a huge tool. And also in terms of seeing the track build, if you highlight everything, you can sort of see if the track is building too quickly or not building enough,
right?
Just by the sort of mass of what's going on in the MIDI. So, you know, that's quite useful.
I guess another question that's sort of relevant to it too is about orchestration can have so many fine-tuned details to it. It's such a detail-oriented process in a lot of ways, and I think, you know, part of the reason why the job exists is because it's really challenging for composers on time restraints to exercise that level of detail, you know, to that degree, while also producing a convincing mock-up, while also writing the right music for the story. There's like so many layers to it. As a composer who is also an orchestrator, are there tools or strategies you employ in your own writing from your orchestration knowledge that you feel help you be more efficient with your orchestration?
Definitely. I think all this stuff goes hand in hand with each other. You know, I think the better you get as a composer, the better we get as an orchestrator. And the better you get as an orchestrator, the better you get as a composer, because they're all intertwined. So yeah, there are definitely things that I sort of, you know, And sometimes, you know, it's just even picking things up from like a composer. Like if you're working with a brilliant composer and you're sort of seeing what they can do, you're like, oh, I really like what they've done there. You know, that's a cool little trick. So I think there's a lot of snobbery around, oh, well, I'm sort of the orchestrator, so I'm the high and mighty orchestrator. But actually, there's so much to learn from composers themselves, and you know, there's an enormous amount of talent out there, and people who really know what they're doing. I was watching your video the other day. I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of animation thing.
Oh,
And do you know what?
Yeah.
And instantly, I immediately thought, God, you know, it sort of reaffirmed that you're a brilliant composer. But then I was instantly enraged that it was so good, and I thought, well, I'm not sure I can do that. You know.
Are you sure you watched my channel? Are you sure that was my video?
It was just great writing, you know, and you hear this stuff straight away. You know, you can hear straight away sort of who knows what they're doing. And I think that's the sort of difference these days. It's sort of very obvious. You know, it's so easy to hide behind samples and people who are just layering up a million string patches over each other and then claiming that they have this enormous sound. It's like, but you don't, because if you had it in a real world, you're not going to have 1,000 strings sat out the road. You know,
yeah, that's such a good point, right?
It's just, you know, layering like 10 notes in one ensemble patch and then timesing that by God knows how many libraries. You know, however many people are playing in just the one note from the one ensemble patch comes out by 10 and then times it by however many times you're doubling all those notes. And before you know it, you've got a completely unrealistic string section. So I think it's disappointing in a way that we're sort of going in a way that is super unrealistic. I always try to write really realistically.
Me too.
Like I've just written a production music album with a friend of mine, Paul O'Brien, who's a brilliant composer. And we've been doing these tracks and we've been doing the strings, and you know, on some of the string parts that I wrote on that, just trying to fill out the chord, trying to get the most movement and stuff, and trying to think about how a player would, you know, if it was written down on the page, how that would look, and you know, just trying to keep it interesting.
Yeah,
trying to keep parts moving, so they're not just static in an ensemble patch. Which, you know, there's nothing wrong with an ensemble patch. There's the time and a place for that. But general like moving lines and melodic stuff and counter melodies, and you know, I sort of really try hard to focus on those tiny details, even though it'll probably get put under some weird TV program
in the background, drowned by motorcycle sounds. And
exactly. It will never be heard. But you know,
that's the interesting challenge.
Put that amount of effort in.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me too, because I remember one of the first like real mock-ups I did. The first piece I did an arrangement mock-up of that was going to a live orchestra was a Christmas chart a while back. It was like a mashup of Let It Snow and Let It Go. It was going to Ocean Way. And because I knew it was going to be done, like it was going to be copied out, and I was orchestrating it too, like into I think it was Finale actually. But I went through the process of, I split out every part, like in the mock-up, which took an enormous amount of time. It sounded really good, but I did recognize afterwards that like they're both really important, and there's also not enough time to do both really well in most of the time. And that's what's really frustrating about the process in some ways. It's like you just, if you only had more time, I could just split out these things. And, you know, even now, like I'm doing a lot of animated scores, and, you know, with the tight turnarounds, it's like I have to make decisions on what gets used, you know, where the ensemble patch kicks in for beef. And like, you know, for example, I tend to use ensemble patches with like pizzicato or tremolo, because it's like it doesn't impact the mock-up realism very much. But legatos, I mean, it's really hard to get around that. And as soon as you use a sustain patch instead of legatos, you lose that sound.
Oh God, yeah.
You know? So I have to make those compromises in little places. But I do think that one thing that I really care about, and it sounds like you too, is even if I'm writing for an ensemble patch, I'm thinking very carefully about the instrumentation, what I've used, and what would be available to me. So it's like, you know, if I'm using maybe I'm using a pizzicato patch, but I'm still carefully thinking, if this was going to be split out, who would be doing what? Do I have, you know, am I too cluttered in the bass? Like, where are the registers going to be? And I think that a lot of people who like get really passionate or really want orchestral, like mock-up realism, I think they overlook that in a way, that realism doesn't just come from the samples you use. It comes from knowing how to write for the instruments. And, you know, it solves a majority of the problems, you know?
So true. I think one of the best people doing mock-ups out there at the moment is Daniel Baybom.
100%. Yes.
He is just he's just ridiculously good.
Yeah.
There's no two ways around it. You know, you listen to his stuff and you just think, Jesus, you know, it's sort of worryingly like, God, when he puts that to a director, they must just think, what's the point in spending $100,000 getting that recorded?
Yeah, it's a little scary. Agreed.
It's already great, you know. So I think when you listen to those sorts of guys and what he's doing, and he just gets it, you know. It's like what I was saying, Ali. You listen to someone and you realize they just get it. Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said for those sorts of people, and it's just bonkers, the talent out there. Honestly, it's amazing.
He's funny too, you know, because when have you seen any of his breakdown videos? Like, he discusses how he does it, because
yes,
he is very careless is the wrong word. I mean it as a compliment. He places much less focus than you'd think on certain elements. Like, I think he's using like the stock Valhalla reverb and and Space Designer's like Dream Hall or something. And it's I remember when I saw his video on I think it was Above the Sky, the one that just, I mean, when I actually laughed and cried simultaneously when I first heard that. I was like, how is that? He was a huge inspiration for me, like wanting to bump up my mock-up chops too, because I didn't realize that was possible when I until I heard that. But it was really interesting because I'm like, you know, figured he must be incredibly honed into every detail, and he wasn't, and that's what was funny, you know.
It's so true. I think his sort of motto and the way he approaches it is, if you can really hear it out front, then that's what needs to be finely tuned. But if it's anything sort of in the background, say if it was like a wind sort of texture going in the background, you know, he won't spend hours and hours trying to perfect that, because he knows it's just going to sit in the background and you never really hear it. So it's interesting when he solos stuff and you're like, well, you know, that doesn't sound necessarily amazing on its own, like if it's that wind texture that I was just talking about, hypothetically. But when he puts it all together and he really programs the stuff that sits up front, which is properly ridiculously good. Yeah. And he just knows how to orchestrate. He just knows where instruments sit well and how, what needs to happen with it. And I think that's the key. And he obviously works really hard, and it just shows you just don't need a million samples to, you know, we've all been down that rabbit hole of buying way too many samples. And I certainly have. I just got to a point where I unsubscribed from every developer. I was like, nice. Right, if I can't write with all these libraries, then I should probably just stop doing it, because if you can't write with all of those and you still can't get a good sound, then there's a problem occurring.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, you know, I think you just have to learn what you've got, and you find out what combos work for you, like what instrument doublings, what library doublings work well together, and you just sort of rinse and repeat, I guess, until something else new comes along. I mean, you know, things like strings, I've not really heard anything come out that's been better than Cinematic Studio strings, for instance. I haven't heard anything that's come even close to that. So it's like, well, I'm just going to stick with that until it doesn't work anymore, which hopefully will be another 10 years or so.
I hope so. I am, as I've told them millions of times over email, I am a disciple of their libraries. I have their strings, brass, winds.
That's fantastic.
There is something, I'm extremely picky about wanting to like hear legato in my libraries. And like, I've been through, particularly winds. I was through a lot of wind libraries, and I remember when I heard their Cinematic Studio Wins, just for me personally, I think I bought it the second I heard it. I was like, that's it for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this till afterwards, but regardless of the library that you use, having like the benefit of using one company's libraries through a section or through the orchestra can be really helpful because it saves you so much time with balancing and articulation programming, however you do that. Like now that I use their winds, brass, strings, it's like 80% of my problems are solved in terms of balance. Maybe got to tweak things a little bit, gain stage, or like, you know, if I need beefier horns, I might use like Cinebrass stuff. But for the majority of it, like that whole issue is solved, and they sit in the same room. It saves a lot of like that headache of detail programming.
Yeah, totally. I think there's so much sort of behind the scenes of programming. I often think people just think maybe people are just starting out. It's easy to just think that you just sort of play it in and it just automatically sounds good, which I really wish it did. There's so much behind the scenes in terms of, you know, like you say, the balance and the various articulations that you need to put in place.
So everybody asks, they're like, can I have your template with all the instruments in it?
Yeah.
Like, number one, no. Number two, even if I gave it to you, that's what I always, because I sell my template and everybody's like, you know, is it going to sound like yours? I'm like, no, it won't. It's because it's just, that's up to you to customize that. It's, you know, it's funny too. It's an interesting point, but it's like, even if you gave someone your everything, every tool that you used, I still don't think people would be able to replicate how you work because you have such an intimate knowledge of the way you use things, you know?
No, and this sort of takes me on to something else that I think we actually spoke about this on the phone when we spoke last time. In that I can't remember if it was you that I spoke to this about, but people are sort of scared to give away information, and that's why I respect people like you, because people think, if I give away information, people will steal my job. It's like, that's not how it works. If Hans Zimmer teaches you how to score a movie, he doesn't instantly think, God, people are going to stop hiring me because someone else can now do this movie score. It's like, that's just not how it works. You bring something different to the table that someone else does. You know, it's not all about being the best composer. You know, the people who are writing in Hollywood, they're fantastic composers, but I know a lot of people who are, you know, are definitely on that level, and given half the chance, they could write that sort of music. But could they work with clients? Can they turn it around in that short space of time? Can they deal with ghostwriters or assistants or people who need to help them bring it across the line? Can they well then orchestrate it? You know, it's all these extra components that sort of in the chain that you have to deal with. And I just wish that people would I think people are sort of getting their head around it now, where people are willing to give more stuff away, because maybe the days of worrying about losing your job to someone else are maybe going by. But I just think it's awesome that people are sharing stuff more these days, because you know,
I think our industry is expanding. I think it's expanding outwards in some ways. So it's, you know, maybe, I guess I can't speak on the past, but from my impression of it, it seemed like the qualifiers to get this kind of work are extremely high. The tools were more limited for people to just, you know, spend $100 and make music that's ready to go. And so I wonder if maybe that's why trade secrets and things like that would be more proprietary, because it's maybe, but now, you know, the types of work you can get have expanded. I mean, you know, most of my income is made doing like animated web scores currently, and various like mock-up gigs and orchestration gigs, and I'm fine with that. I actually really enjoy it. But what's interesting, you know, it's expanded in a way where I think that people aren't really competing with each other. And like you pointed out, this is ultimately a team sport in many ways, and being able to communicate. This is why I always advocate for people to, like, you know, whether it's make videos or whatever it is, just share your knowledge, like you're pointing out, because it also improves your ability to communicate in general. And, you know, if you can communicate to someone what you do or how you do it as an educator, then it only makes you better equipped to communicate with people like clients, or like you pointed out, other orchestrators, copyists. Like your communications skills are, oh my gosh, I would argue as important as your skills, musically. It's a huge part of what we do.
Totally, that is enormous. I often think sometimes the music part is sometimes the smallest bit. It's learning how to navigate people and the different personalities and just sort of getting a workflow right. I mean, I always do this thing where at the end of every job, well, if there's time, I will spend a few hours to think about what it was that I wasn't so fast at and how to sort of circumvent that next time. So if it's like an extra shortcut that I need to program in, I'm quite self-critical at the end of every project. So I will, well, not the end of every project, just in general. I think I'm very self-critical, but particularly at the end of every project when I'm trying to, speed up workflow or see the kind of thing that I can, work on and do better for next time. I think it's always about sort of finding the best possible way that works for you, the quickest possible way to do something.
I do the exact same thing. I have it would have been on this screen right here had I not moved it to give way for my social plug. But it's literally a pinned note on my Apple Notes called Template Tweaks that is up on the side. And when I'm working on a project and I'm like, I am so sick of loading up this Deduk every single project and not having it in the template, it right into the notes folder, because it's just circling back to what you mentioned before, that people expect to sound good out of the box and just be ready to write music. Like, those are where you make the trade-offs. I think you have to make decisions on where you make trade-offs because time is so limited. And I think that, as people on my channel know, I'm a huge advocate for efficiency, because I don't want to spend 70% of my project time trying to load in a patch and EQ it and mix it.
Yep.
I want to be able to write music as quickly as possible. And it's interesting, maybe this is going to be a whole side tangent, but I've started to outsource work a little bit more, just in small doses, because I'm getting really into the concept of doing that for this reason. And I think what's really interesting about it is it's made me have to think very actively about where I provide the most value for the time that I'm involved in a project, and where those other tasks could be given to somebody else who can contribute that value.
So it's really interesting that you say that, because you must have read my mind, because I was going to get onto that. And I think people are quite nervous about not doing everything on their own. And I think that, collaboration and outsourcing and having a team, you can't do everything on your own. There's only so many hours in the day. And to get the job done most efficiently, sometimes you need other people to help you. So me and a friend of mine who's also he's a brilliant orchestrator. We sort of got together and we looked for an assistant to find somebody who could help us with various parts of the process. So the MIDI clean, the exporting of scores as PDFs and all that sort of stuff, the more sort of admin roles. And we found two people, Tim Lassiano and Rolf Gustafsson, two brilliant people, two brilliant musicians, and they've been sort of helping. And Evan sometimes helps on some things that I'm doing, because it's just been a crunchy year. But it's just been so important to have them around, and we've developed this whole entire workflow. And we've there's always things to be tweaked, but we've just got it in such a way now that everything is super efficient. And I cannot work in it. I think you'd agree that it's just so hard to work in a way that isn't efficient. If you're having to do things over and over again, it slows you down. It increases, your chance of making mistakes and stuff like that. So it's so important just to spend time getting stuff right early on. Even if you waste your first couple of days on a project, getting everything set up that you need, whether that be a template or whatever it is, talking through to your team about what's expected and everything that they need to know, fill them in on the backstory about what the project's about and all those sorts of things so that they can deliver in the best possible way. But I do feel like there's a certain attitude out there that I certainly had a few years ago where it's like, I've been hired for this job. I need to do every single part of it myself. And then as you get busier, you realize you literally cannot do that because you have to sleep and do, it's just not possible.
I think it's there will always be a trade-off, I think, regardless which choice you make, but where is that trade-off the best and the worst, like, because you will be, like you said, you will be trading things like your mental health, physical health, I've had plenty of gigs. I just had a gig recently where it paid well enough that I could outsource it, but I still had the question like, well, it's just a couple extra hours. Maybe I'll just do it myself. And then I thought about it and I was like, I think I'd like to have dinner. That's
the thing. It's you have to have a life. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're just working non-stop all the time, it doesn't become a point where you even want to do it. It's like if you're so burnt out, this is a creative job that requires, it demands a lot from you. And if you're literally feeling burnt out all the time, I genuinely, I just think you can't do it after a while. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my take on it, I guess. But
do you feel like you hear that in? Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, go on. I was just going to say you have to know your limits. Like I previously, I think in years gone by, I would have done all-nighters and stuff, and I still will now if I absolutely have to. But I think you get to a point where you're like, I can get to like the 18-hour mark, and then I start to get super fuzzy. My brain just starts to get. That's
a long time.
You're just looking at notation. You're just seeing black dots everywhere, and it's like, okay, this is the time to go to bed.
That's mad, man. Do you do 18-hour crunches? Is that a regular thing?
I wouldn't say it's super regular. It does happen from time to time, and it certainly helps to have a team with you when that gets tough, because especially when there are, if composers send you stuff to be orchestrated and then they've sent you the wrong stems, or, they're getting tired as well. And eventually the whole thing can grind to a halt if you're not super careful. They're sending stems over maybe which haven't had the renaming of files. They haven't named it like a V2, and then all of a sudden you don't actually know which are the new stems and which aren't. So it's all these sorts of things that everyone gets more and more tired as time goes by. It just becomes increasingly more scary.
That's incredibly detail-oriented job too. I mean, orchestration. I mean, that is composing in long stretches. I find very difficult as well, but orchestration, I can't imagine, because your job sort of depends. I suppose it's even true, maybe even more true of like a copyist. Like your job depends on your ability to catch the errors because of the cost of time, at a session. Like, does that terrify you when it gets that close? Or you just kind of, you go on autopilot?
It does terrify me. And I think if you're not terrified by it, you don't care enough about it. You should be nervous about, this sort of stuff. It should bother you that it's like, I'm doing a job here. This is a very serious thing. There's a lot of money on the line, and you want to do a good job. So I do think there is an element of not terrified in the sense, oh my God, I can't do this. Terrified in the sense that, you know that the crunch time's coming up. You know that the composer is getting more and more tired as time goes on. You know that you've got to catch these things, and you've got to be on it. Because a small mistake this end could take 20 minutes in the studio if something went. I've never had anything like that. But if anything did go wrong or needed to be revised, then the clock is ticking, and it is a very expensive clock. Every time it ticks, it's like, God knows how much money down the drain. So, you just have to be wary about all this stuff. And as experience goes on, you know how to prepare, and you know what you need to do to sort of deliver in the best way. And for me, if I am, say, 3 days from the end, but they're still long days, I'll do like an 18-hour day, and then I will go to bed. and wake up with a fresh brain, because I just don't think it's necessary to go all the way into the next day without sleep. You actually just get less and less efficient as time goes by. I mean, fair enough, if the deadline is literally the next day and you have to do all night, so that's different.
Yeah.
But I think people who are doing all-nighters when they don't have to, it's the worst mistake you can make, because you just get slower and slower and slower. And, you know, people who sort of glorify staying up for 3 nights in a row, it's like, well, you know, you're just a lot slower because you were so tired. So
100%.
You know, the point I'm trying to make here is you just have to know your limits and where you just think it's better to stop for the day and go again tomorrow.
Yeah, and people fool themselves, I think, into thinking that that they need all that time, or that it'll somehow make it better too. Because I've even fallen into that trap. I don't fall into it when I'm busy, because I think the switch flips for me. But when I'm not busy, I can very much fool myself into thinking that I need to stay very proactive and doing things. I think we talked about that last time, because I think the last time we talked, I didn't have a lot of work lined up. And that's when I always am a bit more like, hello? Like, panicked. That hasn't happened in a couple months now. This is actually one of the busiest stretches I've ever had. And I like it, but it's presented the opposite side of the problems, which is interesting. But what I was going to say is, I think that, like, people sometimes, it's the Parkinson's law, right? It's that, you know, you use the space that you're given, or people can be tempted to do that. So when you don't set personal limitations on knowing your limits and establishing that for yourself, like, I don't work past this time, you know, in most cases at least, then you'll just keep working because you never know when to stop. And I'm reading a book right now on it's called Essentialism. I don't know if you read or not.
Little bit.
Know how to, no, I always have to clarify that. I figured you do as an orchestrator, but
I prefer audiobooks in terms of actual books.
Yeah,
I take a lot more in from listening. But yes,
well, you can do them at the same time. Yeah, no, it's a really good book. It's called Essentialism: The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. Highly recommend. It's like the best $7 I ever spent. But he was talking about exactly what you said about you know, you pay, like, an all-nighter, for example, like, you pay for it not just from that time, but also from, you know, the recovery of that time. And, you know, people with a good enough amount of sleep can be twice as productive as people who are underslept. So that whole idea that it's just like, I put more hours in, I get more done, is just simply not true and unsustainable. And you can't, maybe on a crunch, you might, it's just how it is and you got to get it done, but not as this is my life and this is how I sustain myself.
You know, music is important to us in our lives, but also being able to actually, if you don't have the mental capacity to do the job, you're not going to be able to do it. You know, even as much as you love it, if you're too tired or if you're just too burnt out mentally, you have to at some point draw a line. And I think that's where exercise comes in, and just getting away from it and. You know, I think, as I've said to you before, I do cycling. Probably people have seen on social media, but that's the time when I don't listen to any music, because that would be very dangerous.
Right.
You know, it's the time as swimming as well. I'm not listening to any music there, so you're literally just focusing on what's going around you at the time. And there's nothing better than cycling through some pretty English village in the height of summer. With the cycling club, and everyone's absolutely loving it. And you know, it's just good to do stuff outside of music. I think it's good to have. There was a Dan Keane video the other day, which I sort of caught a little bit of, and that was something about having a hobby. And
yes, I saw that one.
It's so important to have stuff outside of music. You know, because you need stuff to recharge your creative batteries. That you, you need stuff to. If I just spent all day, every day in this room, what are you actually getting? What are you trying to put into the music? You need sort of life experience. Yeah. And the stuff you see or the stuff you feel being channeled into your work, you know, I don't know. That's just how I see it.
Well, I don't want to keep you too much past. I don't want to keep you too much past your bedtime because I know we have a time zone difference. I suppose my last question for you would be because Chris, you asked me this and I thought it was a good one and made me think. Do you have, especially since we're approaching the new year, do you have anything that you're willing to share about like personal or professional goals for what you hope to achieve next year? Have you thought about it?
There's one particular goal that I'd like to achieve that has nothing to do with my career in a sense, but it still music related. I'd really like to. It's something I failed at this year, and I'm really annoyed at myself that I failed at it. I was really planning to do my own album and get it recorded properly, and get it mixed and mastered by somebody else. Just like not to a brief, just completely random. Just just for the hell of it, because why not?
Yeah.
Because I've never done anything like that, and I it's sort of a challenge in a way because people like us are so used to following like a guide of what we need to do, to just sort of have the free reign to just go, look, I'm just going to write crazy stuff like nothing really like I've written before, and just try and push myself out of the box, because hey, as yourself, you just sort of you might get stuck in your hands just go to the certain chords,
right,
over and over again, and it's not like an insult to us as composers. It's just that's just what you do. So I thought it'd be nice to push myself out of that and try and do something just a bit different to what I'm usually doing, and get it put on vinyl. That was another thing, and have proper artwork, and I really wanted to do that, but just didn't have time, and so I'd like to try and fit it in next year at some point if I can. I would say that's my goal, and I'd like to sort of work more with pop artists and do string arrangements and stuff like that. I'd quite like to do bits and pieces like that, but we'll see.
I know you're a big Keane fan, aren't you?
I am a big Keane fan. Yeah, I was going to try not to bring that up because I knew that would piss quite a lot of people off. If I brought it up,
I like Keane too.
To work with Tim Rice-Oxley is honestly one of my biggest life dreams, because I think he is just an absolutely phenomenal songwriter.
Yeah.
And he just writes incredible music that I just find myself, I find I relate to. And it's funny because on my Spotify Wrapped stats, it said your sort of main choice of music is melancholy. And I thought, well, that just about sums it up, really, doesn't it?
It just gave you, didn't it give you like the aura too? It just gave you like, deep blue.
I just thought, that's it really. But I would absolutely love to do some stuff with Keane, or I don't know if that would be even possible, but one day that would be my goal.
I have confidence in you. I think you're a brilliant composer and orchestrator and a really nice guy. So I think that's, I just have finished a video. It hasn't come out yet, but it was talking about my annual plan, because I made an annual plan last year. First time I did it, and like wrote to myself from the future. I saw that. I thought that was awesome. Oh my gosh, man. It works. It's really crazy, but it works. Like I would say maybe like 80% of the stuff I put down happened. And what was weird was I wouldn't even look at it regularly. I would look at it like maybe once a month in passing. Yeah. So, but there's just something about making a commitment to yourself. It just, I don't know, it just sticks in your subconscious in a way that, that I hadn't experienced before. So, I think, man, annual plan of writing an album, working with Keane, I have confidence in you.
Well, fingers crossed. Let's hope. Yeah. But I'd be interested to hear more about the way you do that. Maybe once we finish this, you can share a secret about how you put that together. I'd really like to hear
yes. That. Yeah, well, I'll save that for the other video, but I'll wrap up our interview chat. But this has been Tristan Noon. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. I really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been really awesome to chat. Thanks to you.
Yep. And everybody go check out his socials and his music, because he's awesome. So take care.